This is the Lean Construction Blogs Podcast, a podcast dedicated to stories, case studies, and lessons learned of applying lean construction from around the world. Join Dick Beyer as he interviews industry leaders, lean construction practitioners, and subject matter experts to help you improve the build environment in general and your design and construction projects in particular, advance your lean journey, and bring your continuous improvement efforts to the next level. Let's get started.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. It could be afternoon where you are or evening, but it's morning here in Vancouver, BC. The podcast is on the road, and it's fitting that we're on the road this week because we've got a panel of experts that start with friends of mine and continue into people who really know something about something. And we want to talk about what's happening out there in terms of how are we feeding our need for trades out there? And we're focusing specifically on the SMACNA folks who are sheet metal, air conditioning, all the things that make us comfortable inside the buildings. And I have a particular love for that since in 1969, I was a sheet metal apprentice for 3 months. And it turned me into a guy who wanted to go to law school. So I'm so happy to have these guys on board. We got 3 guests today. Tom Souls is a friend of mine that I contacted very early when I took over the executive directorship of LCI, because I knew we needed to reach out to the trades and have a deep relationship with them. And Tom was the director at the time, and he continues his good work with the foundation. So Tom, say hi and tell us a little bit about where you are right now and what you're doing, and then we'll introduce the other guys.
Thanks, Dick. Great to see you again. So I retired from SMACNA almost a year and a half ago, and the executive committee asked me to continue as the executive director of the New Horizons Foundation. The foundation was established by SMACNA 21 years ago, and in that time has produced over 50 white papers and studies on relevant and progressive issues germane to the HVAC and sheet metal sectors. So I'm delighted to have that opportunity continue, and we're doing some great work, and that will continue as we move forward.
Well, we look forward to talking about that today. Second up on the panel is a fellow I met for the first time, Guy Gast, who's from the Waldinger Corporation in lovely Des Moines, or as they pronounce in the state, Des Moines, Iowa. Guy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Well, I spent the better part of 42 years with the Waldinger Corporation. I retired in December, although I continue to consult. And I also serve as chairman of the New Horizons Foundation, have for over a decade now, and particularly enjoy the opportunity to visit with people about what's going on and what's going to go on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Welcome. And you're one of the guys that, as executive directors, Tom and I, of course, need the people that actually do the work. So I appreciate you jumping in and taking that row or that oar. And another friend that we worked together before, and I always look back on the 100,000 people that I've worked with and just count them all as my friends. So Jim Morgan is with Worcester Air and Heating. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, Jim, but introduce yourself and welcome to the podcast.
Sure. My name is Jim Morgan. I'm the president of Worcester Air Conditioning. We are located about 25 miles west of Boston. We're a straight line sheet metal manufacturer, and we tend toward the more complex work. So we've got about 130 sheet metal workers out in our buildings and in our shop today. And we're working on Boston. We're very fortunate to have a very robust construction market. And we're working on a bunch of labs, a bunch of hospital work, and a bunch of high-rise buildings between Boston, Mass, Worcester, Mass, and Providence, Rhode Island. I'm happy to be here.
Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, we met on the Engineering Research Center at the award-winning Energy Research Center, which was the first big IP that Brown undertook a few years ago, and they have continued doing those IPD projects down the line. So thanks for that. So I think the thing that people are really interested in, and maybe this is just because I'm really interested in it, is what's happening out there in the market, and especially from the trade side, and especially from what is really the trade that I think is most representative of a really great production cycle people think about in terms of actual production, is the sheet metal air conditioning HVAC side, because there's so much fabrication of things that happen, and there's design, there's shop drawings, there's fabrication, there's installation, there's commissioning, it really covers the waterfront, and it dovetails with a lot of what we're talking about in the lean community, but also with what we're talking about in construction. So Tom, I know that you have been looking at encouraging folks to get into the labor market and the rest of that. We know that we are suffering right now from a dearth of available players in the market to do exactly the kinds of stuff that our sheet metal workers do. What do you see? What do the three of you really see about what's happening in the market? How are we going to build stuff in the next few years, given this great demand for help and a great demand for work at the same time?
Well, as you know, Dick, the COVID dilemma accelerated the retirement and the leaving of individuals in the industry, and that has created quite a problem. I think with the infrastructure measure and the flow down impact on building construction, we're going to see a real gap in skilled labor and available resources. You know, I think the timing of this get together is very good. You know, SMACNA launched a career center 2 days ago, March 1st, where members can go in and post available openings, and very shortly, individuals looking for work in the industry can go into that as well. So the association is attempting to respond to this dilemma, and I think I know Guy and Jim can talk locally from their perspective about what they're doing with labor to try to fill the skilled labor positions and openings, and also in the non-labor positions, project managers, estimators, et cetera.
Yeah, let's go to Jim first, because you're still actively working, and then we'll get Guy's. I think you told us in the warm up 143-year perspective of working in the business. So let's check on Jim. What do you see happening, Jim, and especially in the specialty sheet metal, custom sheet metal, higher end project lines? What's your sense of your ability to meet what the market's asking you to do?
Yeah, I would say that, we're strained. I mean, the reality is that, to be an effective, productive sheet metal worker takes years of training. I think one thing that's clear about our trade is that, the more the better worker you'll be. And particularly because particularly in the leadership areas where we need skilled foremen who can lead men and understand the complex nature of the business, because planning, the coordination, we have 10 full-time draftsmen. And learning of those skills takes many, many years. First in the field, I mean, we find draftsmen who start as workers in the field and then learn how to coordinate complex buildings are much more effective. And it takes probably 10 years of combined training to train a good planner. We are fortunate in Boston that we've got a very active and effective apprentice program. We've brought in a lot of young men and women over the last couple of years, but they can only do what they can do, in the short term. So one of the things we're trying to do a couple of things. We're really focused on trade schools, because the kids who come out of those schools come out with an orientation toward work. Many of them started work at a young age. Many of them come from families where, you've got two wage earners in the family, and the whole family is accustomed to having worked. And they come out with a little bit of training that's sort of a leg up. And probably the second thing that we're trying to do is move as much work as we can back into our shop, where we think we can do work more safely. We think we can do it more productively. And we think we can speed the effort once the combined pieces of prefabrication, reach the field location.
Yeah, a lot of the sheet metal trade was very important to our kind of concept around common trade racking, so we could bring multiple assemblies back into the shop to make that stuff happen. So I'm glad to hear that you're bringing that back, because that really is when we focus on more lean productivity kind of stuff. That's one of the things that we're really underscore right off the bat. So Guy, you're the chair of the New Horizons Foundation, and in that position, what do you see happening out there, and what, based on your experience, what should we be doing to try to deal with this crisis?
I'd say it's all of the above, because the challenge of recruiting is somewhat tied to the way labor's traditionally entered the marketplace. It's usually at the demand of a contractor saying, yes, collectively we can take on more apprentices. So we have to break down that barrier that says we'll wait until there's a demand, because by the time we react to that, we're late to market. So there is historically in our markets, we're a fairly large mechanical electrical contractor in the Midwest. So we do all three trades: mechanical, electrical, sheet metal. And I don't see a great difference in our Midwestern offices in that situation. Contractors all collectively say we need help. The union does the best it can to respond. I would say one of the things I view as challenging right now is we have historically had a high population of apprentices and pre-apprentices. So a pretty active young pipeline coming into the trade. On a really great day, maybe as many as 40% of our plumbers and fitters were helpers or apprentices. And while that may sound like it's a heavy ratio, it actually works very well for the type of work we do. And it supports the prefabrication process effectively. But I think the challenge is probably at the lower end of the scale. It's really hard to get young people to come to work for what effectively amounts to a starting apprentice wage, when some of them are attracted to fast food chains or places that are paying quite a bit of money right now for a starting hourly wage. So the attraction of the benefits to a young person is difficult. Mm-hmm. So maybe our business model is challenging. I think that we've seen lots of success with exposing high school students to welding skills or to other elements of what I call the vocabulary of construction. Because if you're not in the construction trade, or you didn't come from a construction family, that experience and onboarding can be pretty challenging for someone that isn't familiar with the tools and the methods. So I think that's all the above. And I'd say I read an article yesterday, Home Depot's program for, I don't recall what they call it, Hire a Pro, Build a Pro. Their foundation putting $50 million into play to recruit and help train people to become home builders, essentially. But if you think about it, that's a population of significant effort to attract as many as 50,000 new faces to the construction trades. That, for perspective, would rival the size of the SMART sheet metal union in the United States.
Wow, it really is big thinking out there in terms of
they may be our competition for talent.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not as simple as it used to be. I mean, when I was in high school, you went through a rotation of wood shop, metal shop. You could go through drafting, you could go through, auto repair, but everybody had to go through those rotations. And on the other side, they went through music and all the rest of that. And now with our focus on science and math, those programs seem to be eliminated. So people working with their hands, even in the high school level, is more difficult. So Jim, you had talked about the apprentice program. Is that both a union and a non-union program, or are they working in collaboration with each other? What do you see out there in terms of that?
In Boston anyway, we have about, I'm going to say 300 apprentices working out of our JATC in Boston. The union does a good job at attracting and bringing young people, more and more women, which is great, and into the trade. One of the things that I think really works, at least for us, is to bring young tradespeople in on. We don't have a pre-apprenticeship program in the Boston market, but we would call it a non-union laborer, with the idea that, the kids, if they do a good job for a year and a half, we would advocate for them to get into the union. I call it the year-long interview, but it's really been a way to introduce kids. I mean, the kids come in, they understand what the work is, they get to meet the people they'll be working with. We get to evaluate simple things like Guy was saying. It's about coming to work with a little bit of enthusiasm, on time every day. And that's really the basics of getting going in the sheet metal union, because once you have those characteristics, you will, if you have those characteristics, you will find mentors, which is a great way for a young person to learn in this trade, in the field or in the shop, who will help you.
Yeah, I remember when I was working as a 18-year-old, I had Carl as my foreman, who called me at 4 o'clock in the morning and told me to get out to the job site because he heard the electrician was going to get out there and we needed to claim some territory. And I thought, wow, what a business this is. This is cool. So Tom, what's the association doing in regard to, trying to fill the gaps in here, trying to seed work, trying to do investigations and research? What are you guys up to?
Well, I think let me just focus on the foundation. And Jim had mentioned this transition from a field position to an office or shop setting. So last year, the foundation published a paper on human dimensions, personality, and aptitude assessment on individuals who are successful in certain roles and how they got there and how they transition from other positions. And that paper has really been telling in terms of giving some guidance to contractors that want to move an individual from one position to another position, or on hiring or promoting internally, saying, what's the gauge of success here based on people that have been successful in those positions. So I think those are the kind of resources that the foundation is focused on. And if we can hand those off to SMACNA, the association, in the membership, hopefully will help them be more successful in those processes.
I think that it's an interesting point, because I think that we are seeing a lot of talk these days in construction on soft skills and on respect for people. I mean, one of the tenets of Lean through LCI has always been respect for people. But to some extent, it's become kind of a kumbaya party, which is not necessarily helpful to actually delivering work, because work is challenging and it's hard. And it really requires, not only does it require attention to those softer skills, but it also requires radical candor and the ability to, talk to people directly about good work and bad work, to really train them up for things. So, Jim, are you seeing some of that that softer, what people refer to as softer side, or what I would refer to as more social skills, as we're moving away from command and control into more collaborative processes?
Yes, I think I think the work and the way work is looked at on the job sites and within the companies is much better than it was even 10 years ago. I mean, the old mentality was, as you described when you were an 18-year-old apprentice, was, show up, keep your mouth shut, and do what you're told. And today, I think there is much more openness about taking ideas from wherever they come, and trying to implement good ideas that are going to allow work to be done more safely or more productively. And sometimes the younger people have really good ideas because they're not locked into a 20-year approach to a particular task. And I see, particularly as with our work with Lean, building a mindset across the organization, which is really hard to do, that will be less hierarchical and more open to working collaboratively, has really improved the way that the work is being done. And I think it's also attractive. I mean, we have to adapt to the way that young people think and work, and their expectation and the way they've grown up is to be able to participate from the outset. And so yeah, I think that if we can, the more we can shift that attitude, and it's very important for leadership to be able to play in that arena. And a lot of the ways that many of us have done things in the past won't work with younger groups of people. So I think it's definitely going in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree with Jim. I think some of the challenge has been getting some of the management leadership to embrace those needs and wants. I mean, it's a two-way street. We need dynamics, and we need to respect the fact that the expectations of our younger workforce are different. They want to know what's going on. They want to know why they're doing the work. They want to know what's expected of them, and they want to hear about it more frequently than just at the end of the job, it turned out okay. So, you know, to a certain extent, I think the leadership development is critical. I mean, we can't afford to lose people. We talk about attracting them, but we have to keep them. So these young people, we have to invest in them. We have to invest in the leadership to work with them. And we have to figure out how to continue the theme of messaging to them that we want and need their services. Yeah, because it isn't, you know, it's not a job for life anymore.
No, and I think that gets back to what all of you have said in terms of attracting, keeping, growing, right? And well, one of the observations I made early on as I got more into traveling around the country and working on construction projects in the early 2000s was how central modeling was and how it was developed really from the mechanical standpoint first, and not, you know, first kind of for clash detection, but how sophisticated mechanical contractors got around modeling very early, much quicker than contractors and architects and other people like that. So are you guys finding that young folks are attracted to that kind of gaming, almost that, you know, 3D, 4D, 5D experience? Is that bringing people into the trade as well?
We have a pretty large BIM VDC modeling group, and it's not all. I heard Jim describe the path generally for the most successful high-level guys, but we have a wide and broad need for the supporting talent to do this, the drawing background work, the annotations, some of the remarking, to be able to create spools and assemblies, to go to the fabrication shop. So I think, Dick, one of the things I've said for a long time is our messaging about the needs of the future is we still pitch heavily the concept of construction work. We don't advertise that we're really factories, and we don't advertise that we're technology firms. And so we're probably, when you look at a website for a local union, I'm impressed when I see it promote the diversity of opportunity in the trades. Because if you just did the simple math, Jim has 10 guys working in modeling and BIM VDC skills out of 130. So we're approaching 10% of the workforce is technology delivery. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another path for us to become attractive. I will tell you right now, I worry some that our folks are so good at it that they become attractive candidates to people outside of our trade, to GCs or to construction managers who are looking for MEP type coordinators or leaders.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, it's particularly if you think about in the sheet metal trade, the guys who are drafting not only have to figure out a creative way to fit our big bulky services into buildings alongside the other trades, but we have to do it in a way that we can cost effectively fabricate it and lower our costs. So the other trades don't have those requirements as sophisticated. So our guys are really good in that way. I also think that, you know, we are bringing more young people in with drafting skills. So in the historical way of looking at drafting was almost like a second career. somebody who had a lot of experience in sheet metal, didn't, no longer wants to work in the cold, was injured or something, or, and just moved into the trade. Now we try and hire young people who have some fundamental drafting skills, but also have the interest and willingness to work in the field. And with our young guys, we try and alternate, sometime drafting, sometime, out in the field. And we love to put young people installing the ductwork they've drawn, because it's an eye-opening experience.
Yeah.
So,
oh my goodness.
And
and Dick, I would echo what you said earlier. It's for decades, the sheet metal trade was really the only trade that was significantly detailing for fabrication purposes, and the mechanicals sort of swept past, because most of what their work is commodity products that are being fabricated. But
right.
they quickly got out in front of and they leapfrogged past unit component fabrication and went to bigger assemblies, because the modeling allowed them to do that. So I think nationally, the more progressive sheet metal guys are doing more of the larger scale assemblies or work packages than they did even 5 years ago. And if you aren't putting things together in the shop and prefabricating spools or assemblies, you're falling behind.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. That when I was on, I've been on several webinars, podcasts, whatever, with my friend Amy Marks, who talks about design for manufacturing. We're moving beyond prefabrication and modular and all the rest of that stuff, and it's really designed for manufacturing. And I think that in our industry, it started with the sheet metal folks, that you're constantly designing for manufacturing, because that's what you do. You have to manufacture something and install it. And you have more of the rainbow of the built environment, because I love that idea, Jim, that you allow the folks, or encourage the folks who actually design it, to go install it, to see what it looks like when the rubber hits the road. There's a book out there by Teresa Mirabile at Harvard Business School called The Progress Principle. And it's about how healthy it is for you to be able to do work where you have a measure of autonomy, you have really good work to do, and you can look back and every day and see what the work was that you have done, so that you know that you're making progress. And that wraps up our business completely, right? Giving people the opportunity to actually work with their hands and see what good work they do and become masters in this thing. I mean, the whole apprentice, journeyman, kind of master stepladder that happens in the trades, it just mimics that principle, and really leads to great results out there. So Jim, you looked like you were going to jump in on another comment, which is awesome.
I don't know. Well, I just, I don't actually have a follow-up on that.
Okay. All right.
Well, Dick,
I'm relying on Guy now.
Well, we're all relying on Guy. You go, Guy.
Oh, you broke up on me, Dick. But one of my dreams, and I shared this with a number of guys, and some of them just looked at me as if I were mad. And I said, I'd love to be able to walk onto a job site and approach any member of a crew, down to the level of a helper, apprentice, pre-apprentice, whatever we call them in every market, and ask them two questions. One, do you know what's expected of you today? And are we making money out here? And somebody laughed and said, well, gee, that's kind of a shameful way to approach it. I said, I don't think so. I think if that young person looked at me and said, yes, I know that I'm supposed to, with my guys, we're supposed to be at column line D by the end of the day. That's perfect. That's great. And no, we're not making money out here. Things have been going a little tough, and the boss says we're running behind and we're hopeful of catching up. What I want to know is, if you tell me you don't know, it's a failure of the leadership to share what we're doing out there, either in terms of expectations or the willingness to be transparent about our success as a group. And I think when you get to that level, that's the progress, is when you get to that level where people say, wow, we're all on the same page here. The company is willing to share with me that we are either succeeding or not, and it's okay. Because the only way we'll get to the objective of success on the project is if everybody's invested in where we're going. And I think that's a difficulty for many of our folks, is to share where we're at, almost to the level that there's some sense that if you tell me, it may not be true.
Yeah.
This is right at the heart of so much of what we tried to do in the lean world, right? So the first thing are, do you know what your expectations are? When we talk about conditions of satisfaction, it's really somebody has made a request. I'm making a commitment to satisfy that request. Do I really know what I'm expected to do? How do I know when I'm done, right? And the second thing is the transparency that has not been a part of our industry for very long, but connecting people and their work to the health and prosperity of the company, that they're all shareholders in this enterprise going forward, whether it's a company-owned enterprise or not. Everybody is connected to not only how many lineal feet of ductwork do we install, but did we make money today? And I think some of those, my friends at Southland have a policy that, and I'm sure you guys mimic this as well, that they shrink wrap what's going to be installed that day. They take it out and load it through a window on a boom crane, and the crew knows when they're done, because that was the work that they had today. We're making work ready in bundles, and it shows up, and that's what they had to do today. And if they get that work done today, then they're connected to the success of the company. Jim, are you doing similar things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the bane of the construction industry is that we frequently do not know that things are or are not going well until it's too late.
Right.
And that's part of the problem, right? So what I like is that there is improving technology that's becoming available to put field personnel right down to the day at the foreman level to understand what he and his crew have accomplished, measured against a benchmark. And so the beauty of that is, because I totally agree with Guy, we should share what we're doing as early and as often as we can without blame. Because, the minute it becomes a weapon, that information becomes a weapon, it's useless.
Right.
So I really like the idea of trying to get people, like he said, involved early and knowledgeable. And look, if we find out early that we've got a problem, our chances of fixing that problem are much, much greater. And people feel better about going home every day. Yeah. Because everybody has pride in their work.
Well,
everybody wants to win. I mean,
go ahead, Guy.
I said everybody wants to win. I mean, the average worker wants to go home at the end of the day, with 10 fingers and 10 toes in one piece, with both his dignity and his body. And they also want to feel as if they contributed. 80% of the people are want to know that things went well today.
Totally.
And a lot of times it's a mystery.
One of the things I really respect about working with trades over the last 20 years is, I think your number is about right, Guy. 80% of them really love what they do, and they just want the opportunity to do their work. They don't want people in front of them. They don't want trash in front of them. They don't want obstacles or constraints in front of them. They want to show up and they want to get their work done, and they want to look back at a building that really works. So I think that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do. And it's so funny, because I think all of the things that you guys are talking about, like and not only just the sheet metal trade, but the alignment of contractual interests on a project. So nobody's pointing fingers. The electrician's not pointing fingers at the sheet metal guy, and vice versa. That everybody sees this as a continuum of work, and they're all on the same team. And Jim, you'll remember putting stickies up on the wall in Providence to make transparent what work we were committing to do that day and where we were committing to do it. And I think that building came in about 3 months early, not just because we were putting stickies on the wall, but I think because people knew what work needed to be done, when it needed to be done, and they were actually committing to that and allowing the other trades to do their work in the sequence that made sense for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So there's another problem we have out there. And I think, Guy, you put this in a really good context, because as you were talking about the competition between working at McDonald's or working at Costco or working at Home Depot. And the challenges that has to, pay people what they're worth and pay and get a living wage from people who want to encourage, and we want to encourage to get into the business. Is there a problem in the business model that we don't honor the real costs of work so much? We're always chasing these low cost projects on these lump sum projects. Is there something inside the industry that could change so that we understand that construction is going to cost more because we have to invest more, and our investments will pay off for us? But you just have to understand that the cost of construction, not just because of COVID, but in order for us to be a thriving industry, the costs have to match the reality of what we're required to pay to get the right people to do the work.
I think, it's interesting to me that if you could just wave a wand and say what would be the single thing that would help the most, would be the elimination of the design bid build model, which is flawed in many ways because people together late after design is complete, before people have had a chance to impact the cost of the work. It also prejudices the ability to get onto the modeling and coordination process, which is so advanced and so complex and takes so much time now that the traditional design bid build model makes it difficult to execute successfully. By the time you've purchased and submitted and begun the process, people are already expecting you to be out in the field doing underground roughing.
You're preaching to the choir, my friend.
So I think, value-based selections where it starts to flip the model around more, which in some cases is legislated. For example, in Iowa, you can't build a public school under an alternative delivery mechanism. It's design, bid, build in Iowa. And it's not so much in Kansas. You could flip it. In Nebraska, I think pretty much it's all still a design, bid, build. So in many areas, it's not something we exclusively control. And we tend to forget when we talk about big city hospitals or mission critical, or a lot of those great illustrations of where they're IPD or value-based, that there's a big universe of construction out there in a highly fragmented industry that is still being built competitively, where, price sells cars.
Yep. That's funny. The approach in Massachusetts to building public projects are 30 or 40 years old. And so they haven't been adapted at all. I think the other thing is that the gap in sophistication between contractors and engineers and owners has closed over time. I mean, if you think about, I've only been in the industry for 15 years, but if I think about the sophistication level of just my own company and my competitors in this market, we're much smarter in terms of how we approach our work, how we design our work, the role we can play in participating in how you build and how you think about building is much different yet. And I don't think the understanding at the higher, at the owner and engineer levels has really of our abilities has really been understood. And I don't think that's just us. I see it when I go to national meetings of my colleagues at SMACNA. We're all getting better and smarter. I mean, the rapidity of adoption of technology is much faster than it has been historically, and we're good at what we do. If people engaged us earlier, they'd be happier with outcomes, would be my general belief.
Well, so I feel like I am the choir sitting in the back hearing all the stuff I wanted to hear, because this is all very much around what we're trying to do in the lean world. We're trying to integrate design and construction very early so that we're not doing design, bid, build, and opening up opportunities for failure. And we're trying to understand what we build much sooner. I like to think, and I advocate this with architects who look at me like I have a pie on my head. let's design a building from the inside out. Let's design a building that works first, and then let's think about what it's going to look like. Because if the building doesn't work, then it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It's going to be a drive-by empty hall someplace. So this has all been really spectacular. Can we turn for a second? Let's turn for a second to the future of how do we get out of this COVID supply chain cycle? How do we continue to build stuff for the next, 2 or 3 or 4 years until we start spinning out of this? What are all the things that we need to do? So Guy, you've suggested we need to invest in younger people and we need to continue our apprenticeship programs. But how do we get, sheet metal to your shop, and how do we get, how do we get stuff to projects, and how do we rationalize buying things? How do we set up budgets and make predictions about things? It's a crazy world out there.
So on a prospective plane, I think we're going to live with supply chain risk for a while. There's too many things happening at the same time that just don't allow me to think that we're going to see this solved very quickly. We have transportation and logistics issues. We have the steel mills that are still running at about within 1% a week of what they were the week before. So the ramp up of steel deliveries is going to remain challenging. And I think in the little nitty wiggly little pieces of stuff, electronic components and some of the manufactured equipment disrupt the supply chain. So what I've encouraged our folks to do is, one, take this on as a different risk management tool, because your only value is advising customers and demonstrating some wisdom about the process. So early advance warning. On the pricing side of the equation, I think you've got to be attempting to shift some of the risk of escalation and commodity delivery or price to other parties. And I mean, I think that it's shared risk. We all need to be invested in that risk. But I think the wonder is, at what point is the price too much? Can someone pay the price?
Yeah, I've always thought that there was a myth out there that the design, bid, build format encouraged owners to think that they could get a building for less than it actually costs. So I do think that more transparent delivery processes like IPD at least open us up to the ability to understand what that risk is and what's happened to projects because of it. But it also opens up the question about how we re-examine the project. As I'm on a project that was about 30% over budget, and part of the cost overrun was that they were trying to cram everything into one giant building. And when we separated those buildings out, suddenly we lost $150 million in cost, which was pretty phenomenal. So it is getting the smart people in the room to take a look at how these things get changed. Jim, what are you seeing out there in the market, and how much confidence do you have that the supply chain will heal relatively?
I have some of the many of the same feelings. You can mitigate some of the problems that you have, but it's going to require more advanced planning. So I don't know who coined the term last responsible moment for decision making, but I love it. And that timing for the last responsible moment to make a decision about what piece of equipment you're going to buy and when you're going to take delivery and how you're going to store it until you're ready to install it has changed. It's shifted far to the left. And so we have to get our people all thinking with a longer horizon. So if lead time was 6 weeks and it's now 14, we still need to be able to build this building and maintain the process of keeping in order. So as the sheet metal guy, we're desperate to be first, and where we can. And if we want to be first, we have to be ready to be first. So I think we can still build buildings economically and hit schedules if we think further out. And I think the other point you made, Guy, too, is, if we're going to buy all this equipment earlier, we're too small. Most of us are too small a companies to take the financial burden of paying for that stuff and then holding it for months. But I have found in Boston that owners do understand that if they want us to meet a schedule, we may have to own some equipment earlier than we might have in the past. And we've found that people are accustomed to sort of paying a little earlier than they might have. I don't know if you found that as well.
Yeah, it's both. And Tom, you may remember Ken Sullivan from professor at Arizona State University, who has worked with the foundation in past projects. Ken has a project or a program in risk management that doesn't involve anything to do with contracts or insurance. But the concept is in order to be an effective partner in the process, you have to be able to manage the risk of these decisions. So while you can plan for certain things to happen with some confidence, what happens when the plan falls apart, and how well have you educated your customer on the paths that we might have to take? Because I think for everyone's sake, and owners are no exception, if knowing where things might go and what the if-then scenarios are, if this happens, we'll react this way, sets you up for success in managing the relationship. You may not be able to deliver the work on the schedule. And that's the other side of this, is that we talk about financial risk, but schedule impacts are significant.
Well, I think that's one of the great things about these collaborative models. I'm working on an IPD project right now that before we have even gotten to validation, which is kind of the go, no go decision, the owner has already committed to a purchase order for $2.5 million worth of steel so that we can hit the construction schedule of getting steel erected in August. And our air handler, our mechanical contractor, has signed a purchase order for air handlers so we can get in line for those to be produced in November. So you're right, that early buying thinking, changing the way that you look at things is really going to be important. And I love that idea of a longer horizon. It gets us back to Tom and new horizons. What are you guys doing in the foundation to really support some of the way that we're seeing that construction has to change in order to be able to support these new ways of dealing with the supply chain that's kind of a mess?
Well, that's one component of a massive study that we've just started. Okay, the New Horizons Foundation has done what we call the Futures Study every 4 or 5 years of the past 2+ decades, and we signed a contract in the fourth quarter of last year, and we're finishing up with developing a massive survey for the SMACNA membership. And that's one of the components in that. I mean, what is the future going to look like? How do members position themselves, given the conclusions of the study, for the next 5 years? And certainly the supply chain, as both Guy and Jim mentioned, is one component of that whole piece of business. But it's a comprehensive evaluation of what's coming down the road and how can you be more successful? How can you develop a strategic plan that identifies risks and opportunities that put you in a position of being successful in the years to come. And Guy, you may want to elaborate on that a little bit. He's chairing that task force of SMACNA members that are guiding this study that we hope to be concluded by mid-year this year.
And I think, the hope is that we can get some perspective on how a wider population sees the marketplace or the challenges or the workforce development or the risk of our business. It is a risky business. And boy, there are a lot of things right now that would give me pause. If I were, I'll say there's a lot of baby boomers that are owners of construction companies. I'm hoping they all stick around, but if some of them decide to bail because this is a risky business, we have another issue. Now, to a certain extent, we're trying to get a sense of mergers and acquisitions, which we think will continue to consolidate the industry. So we may see some disappearance in the middle, as people start to realize the cost of of playing in the space. As Jim said, it's very difficult to train and develop talent for BIM and VDC positions, to have the technology and the ability to keep it running is costly. It's an expensive industry.
It is.
This is one of those industries that will always be a people industry, despite the Hilti hanger machine, which I think is really cool. But as we move forward, this is one of those industries that is almost always local and almost always people based. So what are your thoughts, kind of a final wish list for the future, Jim? If you could look out there and say, 3 years from now, I would like to see, I'm hoping that we get to see X, and then we'll head over to Guy and over to Tom for that.
Well, I'd like to see, that's a long list. I could be here for a while.
Yeah.
I think that I would like to see a continued growth in collaboration between the levels of construction, owner down to contractor. I think I would like to see the continued adoption of new approaches and new technologies to support those approaches, because I think the work will become more efficient and safer as a result of that. And I'd like, I think those are really the critical things. I'd like to make sure that we continue the growth in thinking that construction and the trades are an excellent career path for young people, especially those who aren't ready to go to college or don't want to go to college, because these jobs are excellent. And they're excellent because they pay well, but they're also excellent, we were talking about it earlier, because the opportunities to do different things as your experience grows, your opportunities to take on leadership responsibility, your opportunities to change the kind of work that you do over a long career it's terrific. And I don't think we have enough understanding out there of that.
Awesome. Guy, what do you think?
Well, I think there's several things. In order for us to be successful, we have to have a workforce, both in the trades and in the management. And so the pipelines, we have to open up all the pipelines. And that means necessarily we have to become more diverse. And this isn't just for diversity's sake, but we're missing a large segment of the population that could contribute, could earn a valuable living, and have a great career in a highly important industry. So I think that the widening the net that we cast for talent, and that includes all forms of minorities and women, because we don't have enough for everyone's sake. So that's one. Workforce development, we have to become better at recruiting and attracting talent to the things we need: technology delivery, production facilities, and field installation, because they're all separate elements of attraction. And then I think we've got to get past the software interoperability issues that still plague the industry. There are many, many software components that just aren't conversant with each other. And Jim mentioned it earlier, the ability to actually have an integration of some of your software that would allow more real-time reporting of field production. It shouldn't be as hard as it is to gather data and have it reported out seamlessly. Our enterprise systems and our third-party applications for construction don't talk to each other as well as they should, given the amount of money the world is investing in software and technology. And there is a lot pouring into the construction industry. So I think having that wisdom is there. It's inside all the numbers that we're crunching, but we aren't getting it to the place where it's needed, which is boots on the ground.
Yeah, I think that whole data manipulation piece, getting the right data, getting it to the right place, reporting it in dashboards in real time, understanding what projects cost, not 30 days down the line or 60 days down the line, but tomorrow. I think that's what we should be doing. I've been working a lot on that, trying to dashboard that and make that transparent in trailers. because that is as Jim pointed out in the beginning, you have to fix it when it happens. You can't fix a symptom 4 months later with a recovery schedule. You got to be on top of what work's not getting done, how work is being made ready, and how you actually deliver that work. So Tom, go ahead, Guy.
I think that the value of the big data that's available would be that we would know in advance that we may fail. Not that we are failing, but that we would see trending information that would allow us to say, I've got to reverse a trend here.
Yeah, but those trends have to be based on, like, I get very frustrated with our estimation process because we're estimating based on old data and based on averages and not based on actual, productive, lineal feet per crew, and we're not updating those things. So we rely on information that's not current and is not necessarily relevant to us. So I think managing that data is a huge thing. Tom, any final thoughts?
So I just had a couple of points I wanted to make, Dick, in closing from my perspective. I think we need to continue to improve company culture, that focuses on increases in positive employee engagement at all levels. I think that's particularly important now where, we're probably going to enter a phase of poaching, increased poaching, and other, even outside the industry. Young people saying, well, I can make this, that was pointed out earlier, I can make this much more here, et cetera. So I think the company culture has a lot to do with that. And I'd also like to see continued partnering, particularly amongst SMACNA members. I mean, through my affiliation with SMACNA over decades, there's so many examples of great partnering, whether it's in different jurisdictions or different market segments, and obviously the prime example is fabricating for others, but skill sets and particularly in market segments where somebody may have a particular set of skills in one particular market segment that somebody else doesn't on a huge project. I'd like to see continuing partnering and partnerships among SMACNA members.
Awesome. Well, fellas, it's been great. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate and jumping in here. Hopefully we'll be able to smooth out some of those production glitches based on my poor Western Canadian bandwidth. But I'm getting so old that I don't have much bandwidth left anyway. So I really appreciate it. It was good to see you again, Jim, and Guy. Nice to meet you. Thanks for all you're doing. And Tom, keep on chugging there, my friend.
All right. Pleasure, Dick. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lean Construction Blogs podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help us spread the word by sharing, subscribing, or leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. Remember to join us next time as we continue to lower the barriers to applying lean construction and help take your lean journey to the next level. And don't forget to visit the Lean Construction blog to stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes, weekly blog posts, monthly webinars, and upcoming conferences. We hope to see you on the next episode.